Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Victor Monga. Today, our topic will be resume building, frequently asked questions. Given all the market, pandemic, different times, a lot of people are they're asking questions about how to build resume. So today, our community partner, Tyro Security, is gonna help us, and President of Cloud Security Alliance LA chapter, Mr. Chris Wright. Chris, would you like to introduce
Hello.
yourself?
Yes, certainly. I'm the CEO and founder of Tyro Security, which is a cybersecurity staffing and professional services firm. Been going 8 years now. Previous to that, I worked in in technical recruitment for pretty much my whole career. So that's 20 years in total, and heavily involved in the community. People that do know me will know that I'm the president of the Cloud Security Alliance's LA chapter and one of the founding directors as well. And then I'm also on the various other advisory boards for cybersecurity related non-profits. So I'm heavily involved in the community and always trying to help. And I love this idea. Me and Vic have been talking about it for a little while. And I just like this idea of covering an awful lot of the questions we get, and also giving a bit of update of what we're seeing at the moment. Because I know everybody, it's a strange old time. Everybody's kind of trying to figure out what's happening out there, and I'm more than happy to share what we're seeing.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. All right, so we'll just jump right into it. And anyone has any questions, please post in Q&A. So, Chris, one of the questions that we have seen or heard at least, what are the common issues seen with the resumes? It's very broad, but we would like to cover that to begin with as a founding.
Good stuff. Yeah, there are. This I felt was really important because we do see a lot of the same issues come up, and so it's always good talking in a forum like this is really useful, because hopefully a lot of people can take a look at their resumes and hope to make sure that they're not somebody that falls foul of some of them. So I always say, when you look at your resume, first off, your resume is put together to give a brief overview of your experience, to show a client that they should speak to you, right? It's there to get you the interview. You should think of it as a test. That's the way I look at it. It's like a written test. And when clients look at it, they're looking at something that, is it an honest representation of yourself? Because you will get caught out if it's not. Is it relevant to the job that you're going for? Is it concise? Think of all the things that when you're looking at somebody's written work, think about when you're looking for the same person might be writing reports for you to read. You're going to want their resume to be easy to read, to make sense. So the things that I always say people should focus on, first off, length of resume. I once did a post, it must be a couple of years back now. I got sent a resume, it was 55 pages long. And I actually wrote back to the person and said, look, this resume is 55 pages. And they sent one back and they said, oh, I do have something that goes into a bit more detail than this. Because I said, do you have another resume? And they said, I've got one that goes into more detail than this. So just a reminder, like, your resume is there. It's a test. You show what you've been able to do, but be concise about it. If you are a grad, 1 page is probably enough. As you get more experience, 2 is okay. 3 pages is okay. I would start worrying once you get over 3 pages. If you can't concisely put all your experience in it, then you should be looking at and saying, what's important that's in here? What needs to be in here? What doesn't need to be in here? So resume length is really important. Spelling and grammar mistakes are constants. I would say probably at least 2/3, if not more, of the resumes we still see spelling mistakes. And of course, they pop straight up. We open them up. If we open them up in Word, they're red underlined immediately, right? So I often wonder how people are struggling to still make the same mistakes. So just make sure you check it. Don't be afraid to get somebody else to look through it. Although obviously I'm English, my actual spelling and grammar isn't the best. And so I often ask other people to read through things for me. So there's no harm in doing that. Likewise, look at your formatting. Is it easy to read? you know, what size is the font? You don't want to, okay, I want to make my resume 2 pages, so I'll change the font so it's size 6. Nobody can read it without a magnifying glass, right? That's not gonna work. So, you know, is it is it a font size where it's legible? Is the font the same right the way through the whole of your resume? And keep an eye out where you cut and paste things around. Sometimes the fonts change, so make sure you highlight your whole document and you make sure the font's the same right the way through. And also, I often see people have bolded various words, and sometimes those words aren't even relevant to the job you're applying. They've probably bolded them maybe for past jobs, or they've bolded them for other reasons, and then they've never changed them. So it's really, really important that if you're bolding things, unbold them, take them out, and then think about a good way to get your resume down is anything that's pre 10 years ago. All that needs to really be is a job title, a company that you worked at, and the dates. And that's it. That's all that's needed. You don't need anything more than that. People will ask you questions about that, but anything 10 years ago probably isn't relevant to the job you're doing. Even if it's exactly the same job, it's not relevant because it was 10 years ago. So that's a good way to cut down. If you're very experienced, a good way to cut down your resume. Other things just to look out for: dates of education. You shouldn't be putting that on there. You know, nowadays I think we should be thinking about a lot of I don't see a lot of bias personally, not nowadays. I certainly, when I was first starting in the recruitment world, I did, and not from the recruitment companies, because generally recruitment companies aren't biased. We're the only thing we're biased towards is making sure somebody gets the job. You know, that's how we get paid. But there are people that are biased in companies, and so I think there's a lot of things that people are looking to do to change that. Certainly age bias. You know, you shouldn't be putting dates of education and stuff down. Anything where people can try and work out your age, you don't want to put it on there. You know, people don't want to see that anyway. Addresses, you can just put a city that you live in. You don't need to put your full address. And as security people, I think most of us are pretty wary about putting too much data on. I think it'll be interesting in the future. We might actually even see names starting being removed from resumes. Anything that could give away any extra information of people, we might start seeing that being removed. So yeah, that's kind of my general common issues. It's quite a big one because it's the same old stuff we tend to see. So that's definitely my tips. One thing I did get asked the other day was why external staffing agencies often ask to see your resume before they want to send you a job spec. And I can tell you it's not uncommon, unfortunately, for us to send a job spec to somebody and for them then to send back a resume that has every single keyword from the job spec in it. And often then we go through the qualification situation and we find out that they don't even have that experience. So again, your resume is an honest representation of yourself. Don't lie on it. You should definitely have a general resume. And then every time you go for a job, you apply for a job, you should change that resume to make sure it's something that's relevant. So if you've got specific projects that are relevant to the job you're applying for, put them in there. That's okay to change your resume for each specific job. Just don't lie on it. That's it.
All right. Thank you. All right. So we get asked this question again and again that, for example, if I am a first time, I'm trying to find a job in InfoSec, or I'm transitioning either between InfoSec world or even different industry, and I'm trying to find a job in cybersecurity or InfoSec, what would be the tips that you would recommend given the experience that you have with recruiting and also this job market?
So actually, I think transitioning and getting your first security job, a lot of the tips are very similar. And Don, I see you've asked a question, so I will come back to that. But what you're really looking for is things are going to be tougher right now for transitioning, and that's not because, and we'll talk about what's happened with COVID-19, but it's not so much that there's been a lot of people laid off. It's just less people recruiting while they hold fire and kind of see what's happening. And so, you know, I would say anybody that's either transitioning into security or looking for their first security role, what you want to do is, if you're in a job already, get your experience in your current job. What security related things can you do? You know, can you transfer internally? That's the easiest one. Can you just be the security champion of your team? And if there's no security team, you're in a smaller company, it doesn't have a security team, just take the job on. I want to help with this, and I notice there's something we don't do in this company. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to make sure I'm doing my job as well, but I'm also going to do this. So, you know, that's sort of the tips for transitioning. If you're looking for your first job, you definitely want to be building your experience in both of these situations. So internships, if you're not working, bug bounties, if you're interested in more of the red team related work, volunteering, both for the non-profits like Cloud Security Alliance, that will build a lovely network for you. But also like ISSA and OWASP, you can certainly do that, and that will help. But also maybe volunteer some of your time. Most people that are in security are very passionate about it. And so they often are playing around and toying with stuff in their own time, because it's just what they love to do. So, I mean, if you can help maybe some local companies that have IT there, and help make them a little bit more secure, and maybe not charge them for it, and do it and say, will you give me a reference instead? I bet you'll find there will be a bunch of companies that would love that. So think about things like that. If you can afford it, you can have a home lab. I see people doing blogs and podcasts, even though they're not working security, but just to build their security knowledge and stuff. Those sort of things will really help you. And just bear in mind, if it's your first job, you might not, and it's actually same for transitioning, just because you really want to be a pen tester, the chances of you getting your very first job in a pen testing team are very, very small. You're much more likely to get your first step in maybe a SOC, or incident response, or maybe a network security role where it's a mixture of your network skills and security. So just bear that in mind. You might not get the dream job and in the dream area straight away. You might have to move your way gradually into it. So that's certainly something to sort of think about. And Don, I know you mentioned about military service. I mean, people love to see military service in there. Obviously, you can't always put everything you did in detail, so people are usually understanding about that. You can obviously put something along the lines of, obviously this is protected, so I can't say a lot more about what I was doing here, and most people will understand that. But if you can at least have some of the skills and try and transfer some of the stuff you were doing in the military into more commercial terms, so it's more understandable for commercial people, that will definitely help you.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So one thing definitely I want to repeat, because we got a question about if a current role or current company doesn't have any security related jobs, then definitely, as Chris mentioned, volunteer work, get involved yourself with local communities, be passionate about one of the fields in security that you'll be spending time either learning or growing. That's one way to begin with. And Chris, do you want to add anything to that, just for that one particular segment, if current company does not have any security roles?
Not really, no. I think you look, there's a few things that you're going to look at, right? Do you need to, like, financially, how long can you afford to stay out of work? And one thing to bear that in mind is, if you can afford to stay out of work for 3 months, just bear in mind that you're eating into that money that you've got saved, and in 3 months you might have to take a job not even in IT, right? So my advice is to take some time to try and get the best job you can. But ultimately, like, if something's good and it might eventually get you to where you want to be, take that. Get into a spot that's going to give you the opportunity to grow into what you want to be doing. And often IT roles are a great way to then move into security. That's a really common path that we will see.
Awesome. And do you think having an internship, while maybe I'm working for a company, maybe I do a free internship with another company as security role, that might or might not help? What do you think?
It definitely will help. I've seen students that have, in fact, we don't do very many entry level roles, because obviously people are paying us a fee, and generally they're looking for experienced people. But we've done a couple over the 8 years, and we did one, and that candidate, they were actually looking for somebody with a year's experience, but they took a candidate that they'd done their masters, but in between they'd done an internship, a security internship every summer break. They'd done one, and they had references from those, and they were unpaid. And so when they finished their masters, they ended up getting a job at a company that was actually looking for somebody with some experience, and they took on board not only their educational experience, but also the internships they did. So it's really very, very good for you to do that.
Yep. And the way I see it, if I'm employed at a company, and if there's no advancement in the field that I want to learn, internship in another way can be considered or seen as hands-on learning. So it's not just reading the book and passing a certificate, it's a hands-on learning. So I'm just advancing my career by that hands-on learning through internship.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. Next question is, what are the certifications required for information security jobs?
Okay, so yeah, this is a really common question, and the first thing I tell everybody is they're not required, right? Certifications are not required to get an information/cybersecurity job, right? They're not a requirement. We do see clients put them on their list of desirables on job specs, and typically you will always see the CISSP is the one that you'll always see, because really that shows a broad range of knowledge. And so that would be probably the most desirable one, the one that we see most commonly. But again, it's more often than not, it's about your experience. The one thing I would kind of say about that is that I know that some government and defense related industries really, really value certifications, to the point where they might want you to get the certification within 6 months of joining. So if you're looking to get in there, then something like your Security Plus or some of the SANS certifications, they're the ones that the government and defense tend to like. Outside of that, commercially, it's the CISSP. And then depending on the area that you're really passionate about, I always say, do the certs that are going to bring you knowledge in areas that you're genuinely interested in. So, if you want to be a pen tester, look at the OSCP. If you're more of an access person, an AppSec person, then you might want to do your CSSLP. And like cloud related, your CCSK.
Exactly.
So think about where you want to be. There is one other industry actually that really genuinely values certifications, and that's if they're a consultancy, because they're going to put you out onto client sites, and for them it's actually a way of selling your credibility and experience. It's quite funny really, because your experience is the most important thing in doing the job, but when a consultancy wants to sell their guru in, they're going to tell them about the industry recognized certifications they have. So yeah, that's what I would generally say. Follow your passion. Yeah. Don't forget to look at sort of free ones. AWS and people like that have just free knowledge based things. There's no harm in getting some of those. Is just a good way of showing that you're genuinely interested in the career path you've chosen.
Okay. Yeah, so we have a question that if a candidate has already a master's degree in cybersecurity, do they still need information security certificates? My perspective on that is it all depends your passion. It all depends which industry you want to go with. And as Chris mentioned, either you're looking for an organization who's already in high tech or other verticals, or you're looking for a consultancy job. Chris, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. If you've done your degree in cybersecurity or a master's or something, that's fantastic. In terms of commercially, what we see from clients, they would absolutely value that. They also value certifications. The one thing that I think they do give you is they might give you just that extra step to get you the interview itself, because it's something on paper they can see, right, this person has this. let's bring them in. And so I think certifications can help with stuff like that. I'd also say it's all about continuous improvement, right? We talk about that a lot from a technical point of view, but certainly in terms of an individual as well. Keep growing your knowledge, however you do that. Certifications are a great way to say, I have this piece of paper that shows that I am doing that. And so, that's a benefit.
Awesome. And the next question is, what would be a good explanation of leaving my previous job? So I'm definitely going to put that on my resume, and I'm sure an interviewer or someone is going to ask me, why did I leave it? What would be a good logical reasoning behind it?
Yeah, this is one I know that we spoke about, because people feel really awkward. It's a question that you are going to get if you've either already left your job, or if you're obviously applying for a job. It's why are you looking to leave the current job, or why did you leave it? And so it's surprising how many people aren't prepared for that question. And when we prepare people for interviews, it's one of the things we've already qualified that as part of qualification, but it's one of the things that we always talk through, because people feel very awkward about talking about it. And some of those reasons are maybe they didn't get on with people. Some of them are difficult things to answer. I just say you want to be honest, but you want to be professional as well. So if the environment wasn't right at your company, and you might say that in a lot of very, very straightforward words that you might not use when you're talking to a client, right? When you're talking to a friend and describing why you want to leave your job, that might not be the same way as you describe it to somebody that you want to get a job with. So just think about that when you're explaining it. Think about, you're almost giving a bit of a spin to it, right? You're thinking about how it sounds to somebody else, and you want to think about what that might get them thinking about you or about the job. So it is an important one to prepare for. Be honest. Obviously layoffs and stuff like that with things that are going on they can see that already, right? They're going to be seeing that happen. What's important is that if you do get laid off, try and fill any gaps in between by doing something security related, if you can. Right. I know right now that might be doing online studying, but people will want to know, because sometimes those gaps can creep very quickly. I remember that in the last downturn, we'd see people that had great experience, and then they'd have, almost a year gap. And that makes a client worried when they're looking at that. Why is this person looks so good? I don't know why they've been out of work for a year. So it's really important that you do fill that gap. And also, going back to what we said before, sometimes you might want to take a job. The people that generally have been off for that amount of time, when you speak to them, they've usually regretted saying no to something in the very first few months. So just bear that in mind. That's all I would say. Yeah, be very honest, but keep it professional.
I'll echo back to Chris's point. If there is any gaps, you definitely want to consider something volunteer work. And there are a lot of organizations around LA and around the globe that you can volunteer with them for information security and cybersecurity. It could be that you're on their board, you could be advisor, you could be adding any volunteer time. So please consider that. So instead of having gaps in there, you can show that you were volunteer in cybersecurity field or information security field.
Yeah.
All right. And the last topic today, Chris, we have is, how does COVID-19 has impacted the job market? And if you can give us some insights in information security job market, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Strange old time at the moment, right? I mean, it is kind of crazy. So what we saw is, it's funny, really. I was traveling, so I spoke at RSA, and then I came straight back, and I had a friend's memorial in New York. So I had something like 6 flights in less than 2 weeks, and happened to be going to places that were hotspots, or I didn't know them at the time. Of course, when I got back, I realized they were hotspots. And so when I got back, I kind of saw what was happening and decided to get all of our staff working remotely straight away. And for us, it was pretty simple, because we've always been able to work remote. Right? My staff, there wasn't a huge change. for us doing that. And so we did it a little bit earlier than when, you know, the government called it, and when the state called it here anyway in California. So we saw things, everybody kind of, first off, they were getting their head around the remote working. So everything kind of went on hold. They put the interviews they had kind of pushed off. And then we saw companies do sweeping hiring freezes. Then we had CISOs that were looking for people go and get exceptions. And so they were fighting to get exceptions for the jobs that they had open. And that took a little while. And then once they got the exceptions, often many of those companies had, you know, got rid of many of their internal recruiters because they had hardly any jobs to work on. And so at that point, they had the internal teams kind of work on those jobs. And then recently, really over the last couple of weeks, we started to see more jobs come to us as a recruitment company. That isn't a huge surprise because I think the ISACA's state of cybersecurity had an awful lot of stats around a lot of this stuff. Things like cybersecurity professionals, and it's 72% of them didn't think that their internal HR team recruitment understood what they did. And I don't think that's the recruiter's fault. I think if you're a recruiter for a large company and you're recruiting multiple different positions, not just a month, but a day, then how can you be a specialist in cybersecurity? And of course, the type of people we are in the cybersecurity market, we want to speak to people that know what they're doing. And if you're a general recruiter that sort of does a bit of everything, it's very difficult to build that rapport and trust. So I think there's been a bit of struggle, and also people have just got lost in the system, right? Applying for jobs directly, your resume goes off to a database, it goes into a system that hopefully an internal recruiter pulls out. But if they've been taken onto another job, that might sit there for a month until a CISO turns around and says, I'm not getting any resumes, and maybe we step in and then we can make a direct introduction, right? So that's kind of that's what we've seen gradually happen over time. From a layoffs point of view, most of the layoffs we've seen have been more on the strategic side. So I've seen CISOs and senior management directors laid off. Quite unusual that companies are almost thinking, well, for the short term, we'll not worry about the long-term strategy. We'll just worry about dealing with the now. That seems to be the impact. And also perhaps it's, you know, that's where the higher salaries are, and that's where the biggest difference can be made. So we've seen more layoffs at that level than actually hands-on engineering and teams. And I think part of that is because most teams were running really, really lean. ISACA's state of cybersecurity had something like, I think 58, 59% of teams were understaffed. So if you're already running understaffed and then you make all your staff go and work remote, bringing a whole host of more security issues, and then on top of that, the chaos actually attracts more people trying to hack into systems. Security is busier than ever. So really, not many companies have managed to handle, like they're already struggling to handle with the amount of issues they had already. So we haven't seen that many. And I might be saying this and people are probably saying, well, I was affected and I know somebody else was. And certainly there are companies that have definitely been absolutely affected in many of the industries that you'd expect, that aren't just going to hurt for now, but are going to be hurting for months and maybe even years to come. So I'm not saying that the teams haven't been affected, but I have seen people being picked up pretty quickly. The other interesting thing is the jobs that we're seeing now, companies are kind of struggling a bit. We've seen a bit of a delay in the moving. They're not moving very quickly on them. Extra interviews that they wouldn't even have before. I think there's almost a bit of an analysis paralysis. They're worried about making the wrong decision, and because they've not met that person face to face and generated that, I want to work with this person, they're second guessing or worrying that they're making the wrong decision. So I think that's part of it. And I think the other part is just most companies have not ever recruited for a, not just recruited, but actually hired somebody and onboarded them remotely with no date as to when they're going to be back in the office as a team. So if you're one of those companies that isn't used to having remote workers, you're really struggling getting your head around maybe this. So yeah, I don't know whether that gives a good overview.
It does, definitely. So one of the questions was asked, due to COVID-19, the biggest hit was impacted, or the industry biggest hit was aviation. So if someone is working in aviation, then how do they gonna switch that domain and come to InfoSec? So we covered that in the tips here. So Chris, can you just highlight that 1 or 2 points again for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So you're looking at transitioning. In this case, of course, you're not transitioning. You're transitioning industries rather than job types. I think there's an awful lot of industries that interlink, and if you're a good quality, solid cybersecurity person, you will get a job in another industry. Industry experience is a nice to have. It's a desirable. And actually, some clients specifically want to bring people in from other industries because they bring a different set of eyes. They're looking from different angles. They're not thinking like your typical person that works already within that industry. So I would just say to people that are in industries like aviation or travel, that you can absolutely take your experience and put that into another industry. And I think the most important thing that you can do is, when you're applying or when you're doing this, is to pull out the experience, pull out the projects you've worked in that are relevant to the other industry or relevant to that particular job. I would absolutely make sure that you're bringing that experience out, because it's very relevant. And especially aviation, aviation is a high security area, right? Dealing with a lot of different things, whether that's from, whether that's sort of government security related, things, or PCI, right? Taking payment for regard whatever area of aviation you're in, there's definitely a move that you can make into another industry.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's all the time we had today. So Chris, thank you so much for providing us all the information and answering our questions.
You're more than welcome.